Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com, and in this tutorial I'm going to create a sprite class, and I'm going to aim to actually draw something on the screen using that sprite class. And just in case you're not a games programmer, a sprite is the idea of a sprite is a sprite is something that represents something visually on the screen, and sprites can have some kind of animation in them, which I'm not going to animate the actual sprite itself here. I'm going to move things around the screen, but I'm not going to use different bitmaps to represent a sprite in different states. So a sprite could represent someone walking on the screen, and then you'd have different bitmaps for each phase of the walk. And I'm not going to do that here, but what I am going to do is I'm going to have a sprite class that I'm going to use to create my game objects, which is going to be two bats and a ball in this case. And that's going to handle drawing itself on the screen and remembering its own position. So let's right click here and go to new class, and I'll call this sprite. And I'm not intending to use this, I'm going to use child classes of this sprite, but for the moment I'll use this class itself just to get something visually working that we can actually see. And I'll add to this sprite as I go along, but at the minimum it's going to have a public float x and a public float y. And let's give it a constructor like public sprite, and we could give it maybe an initial position, float x and float y. And you might wonder why, given that positions on the screen are going to ultimately be integer values. Why are we using float for x and y? And the answer is that we might want to add a speed to x and to y, and when we render the sprite, we have to align it with a pixel boundary, so we have to translate these into integer values. But to keep the animation as smooth as possible, we might nevertheless want to remember the float position, so we remember where the sprite should be precisely, but when we render it we have to move it to the nearest pixel in effect. So I'm going to use float for x and y for greater accuracy. And a sprite needs to be able to draw itself, of course, so let's say public void draw, and in order to draw itself it's going to have to be passed to canvas to draw on. So I'm going to make the draw method accept a canvas. Let's add the input for that, and the sprite will have to update itself as well. So let's say public void update, and in order to update itself it's gonna need some information, and well, it's definitely going to need the amount of time that passed since the update was last called. And I probably want to pass it. I probably want to pass it the width and height of the screen, because it's going to have to know what the width and height of the screen is. So let's probably pass that in here. Or another alternative is we could supply it, let's say, to the constructor, which would also work. We can't supply the canvas to the constructor because every time we draw we're going to lock the surface holder and get a new canvas, so this is going to be different every time, and the kind of width and height of the screen presumably will remain fixed. So if we're not too worried about the user resizing the screen, then potentially we could just pass it to the constructor, which I'm quite tempted by that idea actually. So I think I'll say int width and int, let's call it screen width and screen height. And I'm not even sure really about passing in an initial value for x and y, because probably we could figure that out. Let's scrap that. I'm kind of thinking on my feet slightly. Let's just initially hard code values for that. But what I will do is I will have here that should be private, of course. I will have the width and height of the screen here, so let's say private int screen, and this needs to be consistent as well. Screen width, screen height, screen width, and private int screen height. And then let's say down here that this dot screen width equals screen width, and this dot screen height equals screen height. Now the sprite's going to have to load its bitmaps, or it's going to have to get its bitmaps from somewhere. So I think that being so, let's maybe give it an init method, public void init. Now what this accepts depends on what you kind of need to initialize your sprite with, I suppose. And I'm going to give my sprites at the minimum 2 graphics, which are going to be, it's going to have like a main graphic that actually displays the actual sprite, but it's also going to have a shadow as well, which I've kept separate. And as I said before, you don't have to have a separate shadow, but just for the purposes of this game, I'm going to give it a separate shadow. So to the init method, I'm going to pass 2 bitmaps, a bitmap which I'll call image maybe, and a bitmap which I'll call shadow. And again, this is very specific to this particular little demo game, and you won't necessarily want to have the same 2 bitmaps. And I'm going to store those up here, so private bitmap image and private bitmap shadow, because I think that I'm going to do the actual loading of these bitmaps somewhere other than the sprite, because I feel a bit unhappy about the idea of passing in the resources object to the actual sprites, because then I'd be passing in a sort of quite a high level object to quite a low level object, which is not necessarily bad, but I somehow feel as though it's better to load stuff higher up the method hierarchy, higher up the class hierarchy, or the higher up the method stack, and then just pass in the bitmaps here, so to keep this sprite class relatively lightweight and to keep it away from dealing with loading resources and stuff like that. Now in draw, we're gonna just draw the image and the shadow, so I'll draw the shadow first because the image has got to go on top of it, and I'll just say canvas.draw, and I want this draw bitmap, this one, well not actually that one, but probably this one, and I'll draw the shadow, and left is going to be X and top is going to be Y, and paint is going to be null because I don't think I'm going to be using that. And then same again for the actual image, and the update is gonna the kind of update method, what that contains is gonna depend on the actual particular sprite that I'm implementing. But now that I think of it, probably what I'll do later on is remove that from here and put it in more specific classes, because I'm not sure that I necessarily want to give every sprite an update, because for example my bat, which is going to be controlled by the player, probably won't need an update method because it doesn't have any kind of internal updating to do. So that's my sprite class, and let's just see now if we can go ahead and use that in the game. So let's see, yeah, so I'll go to game here, and init would be the logical place to load sprites, and init is not called at the moment, so I'm going to go to game runner, and game runner calls update and draw, but before it goes into the game loop, which is here, let's just put a comment, game loop, I could do an init, so I could say here game.init, which is probably a reasonable place to do it. And by that time the game already has a surface holder and a resource object, so I could make use of those there. And let's give game for the moment a private sprite ball, and this can be my kind of ball object, and although it's sort of a flattened ball in the case of these graphics that I'm using. And in init I could load that. I could say ball equals new sprite for the moment, just to get this working. And if I look at sprite, so that accepts the screen width and the screen height, so I could pass that in by saying I think I can anyway. I don't know if we can get the screen width and the screen height from the holder actually. Probably I'd have to say holder.get surface.get. In fact, I don't even think we can get it here, which is a bit annoying. So I might have to rethink that. Yeah. Well, I could do something like in my game view. When I create the game, I could pass the width and the height there into the game. Like I could say get width and get height. That might work. Let's go to game and say int width and int height. Well, we'll soon know if it works or not. And I'll go to, if I go to sprite, here I'm storing the screen width and the screen height. So let's just copy those and paste those into game, because I need to store them in game as well. And here I'll say this dot screen width equals width, and this dot screen height equals height. I always feel with this kind of stuff as though there must be a more elegant way of doing this, but I guess I haven't done enough of it to really have a feel for what that is. And in here we can pass in screen width and screen height, and so we've created the sprite, and I need to initialize the sprite with bitmaps. Now I've already got some code in my main activity, actually in the game view, I think, that loads bitmaps. Here we go, we've got this. So if I just cut that for the moment and then go back to sprite, in init, no, not in init, in game view actually, no, in game, bear with me. So in game, here I plan to initialize my sprite. So that means that I can load a bitmap here and pass it to the sprite. So I can say, let's say bitmap, let's call it ball equals bitmap factory.decode resource, and I pass in my resource object, resources. Let's rename that to resources actually, and here I pass in resources r.drawable.button, so that's my ball image, let's say, and just add the import for bitmap, and let's expand the editor here, format the code, and then I can pass in the ball shadow. So ball shadow, and my ID for that is button shadow. Actually, I called the actual image button for some reason, and in fact, maybe instead of storing the screen width and screen height, I could just use it in the constructor. So I could actually call my sprite constructors in the constructor and then call init in init. That has a certain elegance to it. In fact, I'll delete this here and let's just do that. And this is going to be screen width. This is going to be width and height. So I think we're almost there now, and I can say here ball.init and pass it the ball image and ball shadow. And now we're getting to the magic bit, because in draw now I can go ahead and try and draw this ball, and to do that I need to get a canvas, which I don't think I did in my game runner. Sometimes I do, but here I haven't. So in draw I'm going to say canvas equals, actually let me just check in game view. Yeah, we've already gone through locking the canvas here. So in fact I'm going to take this code out of here, and I'm going to do Control X on that, and for the moment I'm just going to return true from on touch event and not do anything with it yet. And then in draw, let's paste that code in. So we lock the canvas in draw. This is in game.draw, and if it's not null, then we can draw our sprites. So I can say ball.draw canvas, and I think that ought to work. And let's run it and see. I'm not sure if I missed anything, but we'll give it a go. So I hope that's not too confusing, because as you can tell, I'm still kind of slightly deciding in my own mind how best to structure this. But the bottom line is that we've got this game runner that's running the game loop, and that's calling on the game init, update and draw, and then game is going to have a bunch of different sprites, and for all those different sprites game calls init, and in update it's going to tell the sprites to update themselves, and in draw it will tell the sprites to draw themselves. And the only complication here, and the annoying stuff that I can never figure out to my own satisfaction, is the stuff having to do with passing around global resources like width and height, because I don't really want to make them totally global with a singleton or something, and passing them around always feels a bit messy, but this does the trick. Okay, so that's running on my phone now, and I'll just show you that. This is what it looks like, and it looks terrible, and the reason for that is that I haven't drawn a colour in the background. So let's just fix that before we leave this tutorial. And in game, in draw, if I've locked the canvas, I actually just want to say canvas.draw color.white to give it a white background in this case, and let's run that. And probably what I'm going to look at in the next tutorial is probably creating some more sprites, or actually, you know, it would be quite exciting to actually get this ball to bounce around the screen, so maybe we'll look at that, and that's certainly something that we need to do. Okay, so let's check on the progress. It's now starting, and I'll show you my phone. Here it is. So we've got the ball on the screen. So we're back to where we were several tutorials ago, but the great thing is we've now got a structure in place, and we're now running a game loop, and all we have to do now is put some code in update, and this ball will actually move around the screen, believe it or not. So that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for bearing with me with all my dithering about heights and widths, and until next time, happy coding.